On your front brake, make sure that on your front brake that you can always feel the lever, that there's always some play in it before the brake actually goes on, and you want to make sure that it doesn't hit your fingertips whenever you pull it all the way back. You don't want to hit your fingers being up against the grip so that you get full braking. Okay, let's not forget that rear brake pedal, because the adjustment on it is equally as important. That rear brake pedal should be set approximately level with the top of your foot peg. You don't want it to start below the foot peg, because if it does, when you end up braking, your toe is going to end up down too low. The brake pedal should be either slightly above the foot peg or just below. There should be somewhere between a ½ inch to an inch of play in the brake pedal when it goes under full braking. You don't want there to be any less than a ½ inch, because you don't want it to where you touch the brake pedal and the brakes automatically lock up. You want one between a ½ inch to 1 inch of play in the brake pedal when it's under full braking. You don't want your foot to go down too far, because there's a lot of deep ruts, or you've got a brake landing off a jump, the suspension's getting compressed, it's easy to catch your foot and get it ripped off of the foot peg. So make sure that that brake pedal is set about a ½ inch to 1 inch of free play. No more and no less than that. That should give you the best braking. Okay, remember that neutral body position that you should assume while you're riding. When you're sitting down, make sure that you stay forward up to the gas tank, arms out, away from your body. When you're in the stand-up position, your head should be forward, up over the front end, over the triple clamps. Whenever you're riding, you should be able to just look down and see that number plate. Your butt, your rear end, it can be back, wherever it feels comfortable, depending on how tall of a rider that you are. Your knees should be slightly bent, your arms should be slightly bent, so that you can work with the forks and you can work with the foot pegs well while you're riding. This is where you have the control over the front end of the motorcycle. Your head should be in this position about 90 to 95% of the time when you're riding. If you happen to get your head back because you stretched out and got away from the front end of the motorcycle, make sure by the count of 1001, 1002, that you brought yourself back up forward again. In case a problem comes up, you're still able to control it. Okay, let's look at what we call the re-grip, and when you do the re-grip, and what it does. First of all, you're standing up going into the turn. As you come into the corner, your throttle will be in the off position. If you were to accelerate at this time, what would happen is your arm would drop down into this position, which wouldn't allow you to be able to control the motorcycle well. So what you want to do is, as you come into that set position, your arms are out away from your body, let your hands slip around the grip a little bit. Let it get a little bit loose. Slide it around and grip the throttle so that when you gas it, your arm still ends up in this position. Without the re-grip coming into the corner, what's going to happen is you're going to come into the corner, throttle's going to be off, you're going to sit down, you're going to gas it, and the arm's going to drop down in this position. So you got to make sure that you do what we call the re-grip going into the corner. Another thing you may want to keep in mind is steering head pressure. That's real important, not only in cornering, but in whoops everywhere around the racetrack. You want to make sure that your steering head is not too free. When you touch the handlebars, you want to make sure the handlebar just doesn't slap to the side. If it does that, the front end is entirely too loose. The problem you're going to have on the racetrack is you're going to be trying to keep that front end from swapping with your arms. So you want to slow it down a little bit. The best and the easiest way on most bikes to slow it down is to tighten up the steering head nut a little bit. Put just enough pressure on it to where you have to just barely help it around with one finger. You don't want it to slap to the side. Now, one side is going to tend to be a little bit easier than the other side due to the fact there's a little bit of cable drag. So find the freest side that it turns to, put just enough pressure on that steering nut so that it doesn't slap to the side, but make sure you don't get it too tight, because if you get it too tight, you can have just as much problems if it's too loose. Here's an interesting new idea. How about a steering stabilizer to eliminate head shake with adjustment numbers from 1 to 8? For depending on the racetrack that you're riding on, you can change the steering head pressure and make it faster, make it slower, whatever you wish. With it on the number 1 setting, the front end moves relatively nice and free with kind of a fast motion to it. Where when you click it all the way over, you can bypass all the numbers, flip it right straight to 8, and really slow the thing down. So depending on the racetrack that you're riding on, what kind of feel that you want to keep your arms from pumping up because you're trying to ride a little bit more rigid to keep that head shake out of there, you can control it with this little dampener on the front end. Remember, gearing is a very important part of cornering and making sure you use the proper gear and that your bike's geared properly. Most riders have a tendency to use too low a gear around the corner. Experiment, try higher gears. Remember, you must use your clutch in order to be able to use a higher gear around a corner. When selecting your gearing on the motorcycle, make sure when you select your gearing that you have a gear that's not going to run out of power half or 3/4 of the way around the corner. Because if you run out of gearing, that's going to slow your speed around the turn. Okay, remember, after you watch these guys out on the racetrack, the important thing is how you practice and if you go out and practice right. Go out there, find the corner that you're going to work on, and work on it for 20, 30 minutes, an hour if it becomes necessary. Convince yourself when you leave that corner that there is no way that Bob Hanna, David Bailey, Brock Glover, or Johnny O'Mara is going to go around that corner any faster than you've just gone around that turn, and then you may have it right, but it takes a lot of practice. Don't get out and race the racetrack. Remember, the word is practice, and that's what you're supposed to be doing out on the racetrack, is practicing and working on your specific problems. Proper braking techniques are very important. A couple things that you can practice that'll help you is doing these front end wheelies here, grabbing hold of the front brake, stopping the bike, standing it up onto the nose so that you learn and become comfortable with this position so that you don't have to worry about how hard you grab a hold of the front brake. Or the other thing is pulling on the front brake and sliding the front wheel as far as you possibly can. We will be talking a lot about braking going into turns and how important it is in other parts of this video. Well, here's an example of the proper riding position. As you enter the corner, your head should be located toward the front, toward the handlebars. Your arms should be up slightly and bent. Your legs should also be slightly bent as you're entering the corner. You must be loose and relaxed at all times. Now, once you get into the turn, make sure that you transfer your body weight forward. Your body weight should be right up toward the gas tank. Again, that outside arm should be out well away from your body. Again, remaining with your head forward, you should just be able to look down that front number plate. You know, there are many different types of corners on a motocross racetrack. Probably one of the most common is berms, which we'll be talking about in just a minute. We have berms and off-cambers and flat turns, and some racetracks you have sand turns. But let's start with the berm turn. First of all, in the berm turn, as you enter the corner, as you step down, leg extension is very important. Notice the right foot and how far it's stuck out. It should also be in tight next to the motorcycle, as tight as possible. You don't want it to make contact with the ground. Your head should remain forward over the handlebars at all times, that outside arm out away from your body, and also one finger remaining on the clutch at all times in order to be able to use the clutch. Not that you need the clutch in every single corner, but in case it happens to fall out of the power band, you'll be able to use the clutch to make the bike respond. Once you get to the end of the berm and you're ready to exit from it, the throttle hand is very critical. You've got to make sure that you have that regrip done. The regrip so that when you accelerate, the right elbow doesn't drop down too low. Also keeping the outside arm out away from your body. Remain in that hunched over position at all times. This will keep the bike from trying to wheelie whenever you're coming out of the turn. Once you get out of the turn and you start down the straightaway, remember once again, keep your weight forward and don't let yourself slide clear back to the rear end of the motorcycle because it's really not that necessary. Good body position and good flow with the motorcycle are the key to going fast in corners. Another turn we're looking at David coming down into here where he drops down a little drop off, goes into a right-hand corner. Notice how much flow he has with the motorcycle, how he works the bike constantly when he comes into the turns. Once again, as he enters the turn, just as he approaches the berm, he sets down, gets his weight forward. Keep the outside leg in tight against the gas tank. The more pressure you put against that, the more it's going to allow you to be able to lay the bike over in the turn. Again, the outside arm must remain up, and if you look closely, you can see David's fingers on the clutch where he's slipping his clutch going around the turn. Learning how to slip the clutch around a turn is also very important. Watch that throttle hand again. You must do the regrip so that you're careful that whenever you accelerate, that your elbow's not going to drop all the way down. Make sure that you keep your inside leg extended and keep it high enough so that it does not make contact with the ground. The closer you keep it into the motorcycle, the better it's going to be. Always remain in that hunched over in that forward position whenever you're riding. Think of that position as your charge position, the attack position. In this position, you're going to have more control over the motorcycle and where it's going. Too many riders let the motorcycle control them rather than them controlling the motorcycle. Here's another shot of David coming into the same berm, only going in the other direction. What's the difference between a right-hand turn and a left-hand turn? The left-hand turn has a tendency to be a little bit more difficult for many riders, mainly for the reason that when they want to try and keep their elbow up, and with the throttle being on the outside, you have a tendency to not do your regrip, and then when you accelerate, the elbow drops down. It's real important that you do the regrip on the left-hand turn, because you want to keep the arm up to keep the weight on the front end of the motorcycle so that you can control it and make it go where you want it to go around the turn. So that's why the left-hand corner tends to be a little bit more difficult for many riders. Remember, when you get under acceleration, always turn, look at your elbow when you're practicing, and see if your elbow has dropped lower than your hand, lower than the hand grip itself. And if it has, it's gone too low, and you need to work on your regrip. Flowing with the bike is very important, being relaxed and being loose at all times when you're riding. There's many different types of berm turns. The technique is basically the same in all berm turns as far as what you should be doing with your legs, your inside leg, your outside leg, your arms, your body position. Don't let your leg catch in the ground and get drugged behind the motorcycle. It'll slow your speed going through the turn, as well as it will mess up your timing, and it'll mess up the angle of the motorcycle when you're going around the turn. Try and keep your leg extended out front and in as tight next to the motorcycle as you possibly can while cornering. Here Jeff Ward shows us a little bit different type of a corner. The problem with this turn is the entrance. When you're coming in, you've got these ruts you have to handle. You must be loose and you must be relaxed as you come into the corner. Then position your weight forward once you sit down, the same as David was doing in the other turns. Keep your arm out away from your body. Keep yourself in that hunched over position. Remember your throttle grip. It's not always easy to keep that throttle grip right to where your elbow stays up, but you must try and work on it because that's where you get your control. Again, that hunched over position, arms out away from his body. You should not be able to see the bend in the elbow from this side shot. All you should be looking at is the point of his elbow when he's coming out of the turn. Bob Hanna going into the same turn so we can see a few different riders. Bob uses a little bit more of the inside line as he comes in so he doesn't have to fight with the rut. He kind of comes in a little bit more toward the inside, lets the bike swap around a little bit, and then drops it into the berm. It's a little bit more difficult to drop into the berm sometimes from that angle, but he doesn't have to contend with those ruts while he's entering the turn. Again, his outside arm is up, out away from his body. His body is hunched over slightly. His head is over the front end of the motorcycle. It's a good idea to keep your head over the front end of the motorcycle in case the front end tries to cut in on you or the front end tries to wash out. You'll have very good control over it. It's also a very good idea to remember to keep that finger on the clutch. In case the front end does try to cut, you can get on the power instantly and be able to get yourself out of trouble. The other thing that Bob's doing here is he stays laid over around the corner for a longer period of time to get himself back for the inside to set up for the next corner. Here Johnny O'Mara comes into the same corner. Now Johnny uses a different line. Johnny goes to the complete outside and runs the entire outside berm around the corner, where he can come into the corner a whole lot faster. It's a little bit longer around the corner. But the other reason is there's a lapped rider in front of him he's trying to get around, and he doesn't want to follow the rider into the turn. So he swings wide, cuts back across, and gets a strong drive out of the corner. Once again, as he comes out of the turn, you can see how his weight's well forward. His head's over the handlebars. You can see his finger on the clutch lever. Much the same technique as the other riders were using. Here again, Bob Hanna comes through the corner again, the same exact corner, only at a different angle so that you can see a little different body position in what he's doing going through the turn. Now, as Bob comes into this corner, you can see again his legs fully extended. It's up high, out of the way. Outside arm is up. Again, his weight is forward. Arms out away from his body, and there's that corner we were talking about he was setting up for. He's kept it laid over in that one turn a little bit longer than normal so that he could swing wide and catch the other berm. Very aggressive riding position all the time. Now let's compare two top riders and how their riding styles vary and what makes one of these riders smoother than the other rider. First of all, as this rider comes out of the turn, he doesn't get his regrip. If you'll notice, his arm, his throttle hand, is in tight against his body. The throttle is turned downward. The head is forward, but he's in a stiff-looking position. As he approaches this jump, his weight's a little bit too far back on the bike and his arms are extended too straight. As he goes into the air, because his weight was already back and because of the throttle grip coming out of the corner before, his arms are down too far. And again, his head is too far back away from the motorcycle, which doesn't allow him to absorb with the forks when he lands. As he comes out of the turn, his arms are too tight in against his body again. Again, this results from a bad regrip of the motorcycle or no regrip. Now, as David comes out of this same section, we're going to look at his body position and stop him in the same places that we stopped the other rider. As David drops off of the drop-off, you'll notice how his head's a little bit more forward. His arms are more out away from his body. He's more in a comfortable, relaxed position. As he approaches the jump, he's a little bit more upright on the motorcycle. There's more arch in his back, and his head is more over the front end of the motorcycle. Once he goes off the jump, there's still the bend in his arms. He's more over the top of the motorcycle, ready to absorb the impact. When he accelerates from the turn, his arms are still out away from his body, his back is more arched, and his head is still forward. Okay, compare these freeze frames, looking at number 1 and number 3 of the two different riders in the same position on the track. Notice the difference in the arm positioning and the upper body positioning. The same with number 2 and number 4. Compare those positions as both riders are exiting from the berm. Okay, let's look at a little different type of a berm here. This is with a ledge on the inside, a little bit like a rutted type berm. Here, Bob Hanna keeps his back arched, his head over the front end of the motorcycle, and with good concentration on the berm, which is very important in all berms, particularly in ruts, to ride exactly on the part of the berm that you want. Now, to keep the front end from trying to wash out where the front wheel's dragging that inside little ledge, Bob Hanna goes into a wheelie. He lofts the front end of the motorcycle. That gets the front end out and allows the back end to follow, a lot like a slot car follows around on a slot car racetrack. Here you can see the same situation with Ricky Johnson going through the corner. Now, good practice for this is to find yourself a rut somewhere where you're riding, or even riding along a curb somewhere by your house. Put the front wheel up on the top and the back wheel down on the bottom and try and ride along it as far as you possibly can without putting your feet down. Now we'll take a look at a couple of the top privateer riders and compare them against the top 10 riders in their riding style and see what little problems we can find and what keeps them out of the top factory riders, say. For instance, entering this turn, you're going to see here that this rider, first of all, doesn't have his hand on the clutch. It's pretty safe to assume by his wrist position with the throttle off here that when he accelerates that his arm is going to drop down. The other problem, the leg was a little bit too low, and you can see that his foot caught the ground and kicked his foot back behind him. Most all of the top riders, even on open bikes, will have their finger on the clutch all the time in case there is a problem and they need to get out of trouble quickly. Now, comparing this rider's position to the riders that you've seen already in this video, you might want to keep in mind and look at the fact that his arms are too far down, they're too tight in against his body, and his back is too straight upright. What causes this? The regrip coming out of the corner, the lack of the regrip, which drops your right arm, which makes you drop your left arm to match it, and then makes you slide back on the motorcycle. Here, Ron Lachine will demonstrate the fastest way through the turn and then getting straightened up and lined up for a rutted set of whoop-de-doos. First, notice how he works with the motorcycle as he comes through the whoops. As he starts into the turn, of course, he has two fingers on the clutch lever. He has his fingers on the brake, getting ready to stop, and his body is leaned with the motorcycle, as it should be in all berms. Once he gets into the turn, he still keeps his weight leaned with the motorcycle, and he keeps his outside leg locked in against the gas tank. As he moves further through the turn, you'll notice that his arm is up high. It's up high enough so that when he accelerates, his arm is not going to drop down and get below the handlebars. Leaning into the turn and looking exactly where you want to go is very important. Once he comes out of the turn and he accelerates, you can notice that his arm is still up high and out away from his body. Sand berms. How are sand berms different from the normal berms that you're riding, more of the hard-packed clay type berms? How the bike reacts going into the corner, how much front brake you use or how much front brake you don't use, what makes the difference? As Ronnie comes into the corner, you'll notice he uses the same basic body position as he did on the hard pack. The difference is you don't use the front brake quite as much, or sometimes, depending on how deep the sand is, you don't use the front brake at all. The leg extension is the same. The body position on the motorcycle is basically the same when you enter the corner and as you go through the turn. That outside arm being up, keeping your fingers on the clutch. The clutch is probably more important in the sand than it is on the hard pack because there's more of a tendency, particularly on the small bikes, 125s and 80s, to get in there for the front end to bury and the bike to fall out of the power band. As you exit the turn, don't slide to the back. So many riders want to slide back. They think about traction. Keep your weight forward, right up to the gas tank. Keep that hunched over position and keep your drive the entire time. You know, how hard you charge the corner and how far you lay the bike over in the turn is what determines where the bike's going to go when you exit from the corner. Now here Mark doesn't have his bike laid over as far as Ronnie did. He's not as hunched over the front end of the motorcycle as Ronnie was. He does have his finger on the clutch, however. His outside arm is a little bit low. It should be a little bit higher in order to make the front end stick. And had he have laid the bike over more, he wouldn't have drifted as wide coming out of the turn. It's also a good idea to make sure that you don't let your foot catch the ground. Keep your leg up high. It's going to have a tendency to let your foot catch the ground when you come out of the turn. How do you know when you're going fast enough into a turn? Well, sensation a little bit like a roller coaster. Remember the first time you ever got on a roller coaster and it went up to the top and it dropped down to the bottom and it kind of took your breath away, or it went around that first really fast turn and you thought it was going to go off the racetrack? That's the kind of feeling that you should have when you charge a corner hard. The feeling of satisfaction that you want to go back and do it again. Now, don't confuse that with fear. Fear is where you go into the corner, you almost go over the top and you say, I don't ever want to do that again. Everybody's level of satisfaction is different. It's like everybody likes a little bit different roller coaster, a little bigger or a little smaller. So you have to find your own level. You're going to feel it. You're going to know when you're satisfied with the speed you're going around the corner. Once that feeling goes away, you'll continue to work on the corner until that level raises up and you're able to go through the corner faster. It's a feeling of satisfaction, of content. Here Jeff Ward comes into the turn. You can see again Jeff Ward in this corner has got it laid over, leg extended, left arm is up high, outside arm's up high, leg is in against the gas tank. He does have his fingers on the clutch and he uses it as he comes out of the turn. As we look at Hannah coming into the corner, look how far Hannah's laid over before he even gets to the berm. You want to start laying the bike over early so that when you hit the berm, the bike doesn't have a tendency to want to go over the top of the berm. It tends to hit, impact, and rebound back to the inside. Powder berms. Probably one of the more difficult type of corners because you charge into a powder berm and you really don't know how far you can lay the bike over because you don't know if that berm's going to hold or if it's going to go away on you. So you have to tend to ride a little bit lower on the powder berm as a rule. Don't get up to the very top of it. Again, just like any other berm, lay the bike over, get your leg extended. The only difference is your body weight will be a little bit more on the outside of the seat in a powder berm, where normally you lay completely with the motorcycle in a berm. In this type of a corner, you'll have your weight a little bit more on the outside of the seat so that you'll get a little bit better traction, because if you took all of your weight, leaned it completely to the inside, like you would on a normal berm, there's more of a tendency for the wheels to wash away. Also, immediately as you exit from the berm, you want to make sure that your weight transfers to the outside of the seat in order to get good traction so that the bike doesn't have a tendency to want to let the back end get away from you as soon as you exit from the turn. Here's another situation with a powder berm. A tall powder berm, you can go up and you can ride and let your back end go a little bit high on the berm. Again, your weight has to stay forward, your leg has to stay extended, and very important, keep your hand on the clutch, at least 1 or 2 fingers on the clutch, because the bike will have a real tendency to want to bog in these, particularly if you hit an extremely soft spot. Well, you should be starting to realize by now that regardless of what size motorcycle you're riding or what brand of motorcycle you're riding, that the top 10 riders basically all use the same techniques. When you come into the corner in this sand berm now, don't forget, if you pitch it in there hard, the front end is going to have a tendency to wash. And you'd better be ready with the power, not after the front end washes, but start coming on with the power as you lay the bike into the corner and the front wheel starts to impact into the berm. You don't want to wait too late or the front end is going to wash out with you. Make sure you keep that leg extended out, well out in front of the front wheel. Now here's some shots of some of the bigger bikes coming into the turn from the rear shot so that you can get a little different angle. Here Jeff Ward has his leg extended. You can see his arms out away from his body. Most importantly, his body is leaned with the motorcycle. Very important in a berm that your body lean with the motorcycle and that you don't put your weight up on the upper side of the seat. Now, why is this different than in the other powder berm we looked at? The other powder berm was a much smaller powder berm. It was a much lower powder berm, so that other bike would have a tendency to want to get over the top. This is a very high wall bank powder berm. Here you can see Bob Hanna going through the turn. You don't even see his foot because he's got it tucked in so tight to the motorcycle so he can lay the bike over as far as possible. The only problem here possibly is Bob's throttle hand is a little bit tight in against his body, but that's going to happen from time to time. Now let's compare a riding position of another rider, a rider just out of the top 10. As he enters the corners, his arms are already down, the throttle's off. You know what's going to happen when this rider accelerates. Also, his body is too straight upright. When he goes into this turn, his front wheel is going to have more of a tendency to want to push, to want to wash out. And if it does, there's not too much he's going to be able to do about it. Now, once he enters the powdery part of the berm, he even straightens up more, giving away all of his control of the front end of the motorcycle. Why? Why not stay more forward and have total control over the front end all the time? How is a rutted turn different than any other berm that you go around? Well, the real difference is the deep rut that's there, that slot car rut. When you enter this type of corner, enter it just a little bit more to the inside than you possibly would if it were a standard berm going around the corner. So that as you come to that berm, you can drop your bike into it and lay the bike over quickly. You also want to make sure that as you're coming into the corner that you look at the outside wall of the berm, because you want to ride up on that wall. You don't want to be so low down in that slot that you're running in that the front or the rear tire is dragging that edge. Because if the front or the rear tire starts dragging the edge, the inside edge, it's going to have a tendency to want to push the front end of the motorcycle, which is going to make you want to shut off the throttle as you're going around the corner. And what you need through this type of a turn is power the whole time. The importance of how you use the clutch through a rutted turn, it's very important. Try and slip the clutch. Slip the clutch all the way entirely through the turn. Don't get in there and hit the power hard. When you enter that turn, you can see how these riders are lining up toward the outside. They'll come over the jump and they'll swing wide. You want to get into this rut as smoothly as you possibly can. You don't want to hit it too abruptly. Again, you can see how Brock is up on the top of the wall. He's up as high as he possibly can. The front end may even get over the top just a little bit. As long as he's on the power, the front end is going to float through the turn. His body leans with the motorcycle and his legs stays extended high all the way through the turn. Here you can see how high his leg is. He's trying to keep it up as high as he possibly can. Extend it all the way up to the handlebar, as tight as you possibly can. The higher, the better. Remember to always lean your weight with the motorcycle and ride the wall, the outer wall of the berm, and try and keep your wheels away from that inside lip. On any given day, what makes one rider faster than the others? Timing, consistency, smoothness, making all the right moves and all the right decisions. Just like going around the turn and extending your leg. If you don't keep it high all the way around the turn and it happens to catch the ground, that's going to mess up your timing. Proper body positioning, proper practice, that's what makes the difference. Should your leg drop and your foot catch the ground, be sure your outside leg is gripping the gas tank so that it doesn't slide you toward the back of the seat. And if it does, make sure that you pull yourself back forward immediately so you're back into your charged position. Now here we'll see Johnny O'Mara going through probably some of the most difficult types of ruts, those long and real deep ruts going through the turn. Some of the common problems that riders have, one, they don't have their finger on the clutch coming into the berm, and they don't use the clutch going around the turn. When you're standing up and you enter that rut, you need to start leaning the bike over, but you also have to be ready with the power. If you were in this position, you started laying the bike over, you weren't ready to come on with the power, it's very possible your wheels are going to catch that inside little lip and they're going to want to wash out on you. Make sure once you sit down and lay the bike over that you keep a good leg extension. Don't let it touch the ground, and your leg's going to have to tend to be higher here than most of the ruts you're running around due to the fact that the rut is so deep going around the corner. Remember, watch that throttle hand whenever you accelerate and make sure that your arm doesn't drop down. All right, let's look at a corner with several different ruts in it and talk about which one's the best and how to enter each one of the lines. Here you can see Mark Barnett coming into the corner, choosing the center line. Obviously, the inside one is very deep rutted, chance of the wheels catching. The outside one is too far around, so he chooses the center line. The rider behind him comes in, tries to choose the second line, but the problem is he comes into the corner and he's overshot the berm. He should have been down lower, right in the very bottom part of it, just up on the wall. He's hitting it too abrupt. It's going to affect his suspension. He's not going to be able to keep a good flow around the corner. Besides, his body should be leaned over more, lean toward the inside of the corner. The rider right behind him is choosing the inside line. He's making a good move here. He's got his front wheel high on the wall of the berm so that the front wheel doesn't catch and have a tendency to want to wash out. Now this rider uses the same line as Mark Barnett did, but the problem is his leg is not extended up high enough and he isn't laid over far enough in the turn. When you go around an inside deep rut like this, the outside foot is the most important. Make sure that you keep that on the foot peg in any type of a cornering situation. That's where you get your traction, and that's where the majority of your control comes from. Keep the outside foot on the peg at all times in all turns. Even the best riders have problems. What causes these problems? Sometimes it's the lack of concentration, and sometimes it's a matter of the bike hits something, gets thrown in a place that they don't want it to go. Here you see Ron Lachine coming into a corner. The bike was bucking a little bit, throwing him a little bit off balance, but when he got into that rut, his front wheel caught that inside edge. You can see right here how the front end is pushing a little bit. He was over the front end of the motorcycle. Now he's really over the front end of the motorcycle. And the important thing is in this type of a situation is to be sure that you keep a hold of the motorcycle in a slow crash like this. Hold on to the clutch to make sure that you don't stall the bike and you're able to get on it quickly and ride away. Here you see David coming into a corner. We're going to see what happens when your leg catches the ground. Sometimes it can drag you right off the back of the motorcycle. The problem a lot of times is you're not ready for it. You're not expecting it. You're expecting the corner to go as it did the last 4 or 5 or 10 times that you went through that turn. Sometimes your leg has a tendency to catch, and when it does, it can drag you right off the motorcycle depending on the speed that you've got going. The faster the speed, the more it's going to have a tendency to drag you off the back of the bike. Well, here we see David at the Atlanta Six Flags National in a little better form than we just saw him. It's with a high bank on the inside. Remember to extend your leg high depending on how high that bank is and how far you've got the bike laid over. You don't want to drag it on the ground in this situation. You can see his fingers on the clutch, his arms out away from his body. This is the position that you should be in when you're making this type of a corner. Flow, timing, and consistency. Flat turns. How are flat turns different than the turns that we've already looked at? The basic difference is where you position your body. First of all, thinking about where the traction is. As you go through the turn, it's important to remember that you don't have a berm to hold you now, so you've got to keep the bike from drifting. In order to do that and to get the best possible traction, make sure that you're sitting toward the outside of the seat, a little bit off on the side of the motorcycle, that your head is forward and your arm is up, keeping pressure on the front end of the motorcycle, keeping pressure on the handlebar, which is weighting the front end. Comparing the two riders, look at the rider in the insert. You can see how his back is more straight upright. His arm is up, but he's not able to weight the front end of the motorcycle to keep the front end from trying to drift coming out of the turn. Both riders look as though they're doing the right thing, but look at how much better number 16's riding position is than number 42's. Taking a look at David and Brock in a flat turn and comparing their riding position. All the top riders basically use the same riding positions. They may vary slightly depending on the motorcycle or the size of the rider. Again, flat turn. David's weight is on the outside of the motorcycle, outside of the seat. It loads the outside foot peg. Pressure is put in against the gas tank. Head is forward, arm is out away from his body, weighting the front end of the motorcycle. The leg extension and making sure your leg does not touch the ground is very important. And here again, Brock is on the outside of the seat, as you should be in all flat turns. Depending on how much traction or how slick that flat turn is, will govern how far you lay the bike over and how much you put your weight toward the outside of the motorcycle. Work your bike all the way through the turn. Don't just sit on it and don't think you can find one exact position to sit in all the way around that flat turn. Here's 4 different ideas about the same turn. Rider number 1's head forward, arm out away from his body. Rider number 2, head forward, arms down. Rider number 3, body more straight upright, arms down in against his body. Rider number 4, head forward and arms tight in against his body. As David works that corner, you can see how he works the bike all the way around the turn. You never just sit on the motorcycle and ride it around a sweeping turn. Always work it, looking for traction, much like a speedway rider works his bike when cornering. Setting up for the next turn and planning yourself is very important, and it's something that many riders don't do. Most riders race from corner to corner. They think about how fast it is from point A to point B, rather than how fast it is from point A to B to C. Picking the best line to be able to set up for the next corner or the next 2 turns is really important. To be able to find a smoother line, to be able to find a passing line, to be able to get around other riders. Here you can see Dave Thorpe as he makes his turns, and he's set up from the first turn, brought himself out wide. He's cutting back toward the inside. You can see the main groove where most of the riders go. They swing wide. And the next turn, being a right-hand corner, he's going to be able to go into that turn much faster from this outside line than those riders that are clear over on the right-hand side entering the corner. Again, that body position as he goes through the turn, you can see how far forward he is up on the seat. His head's forward over the front end of the motorcycle, and his arm is out away from his body. Another corner showing Dave Thorpe going through where he sets up. You can see he swings wide at the sweeper at the bottom, cuts back toward the inside, goes in, drops into the groove, and cuts back again to the inside. You can see how much more traction there is right there where he's running as compared to where most of the riders run as they sweep wide coming around the corner. As we watch some of the other riders coming through the corner, for instance, here comes David running in the number 2 position. David follows basically the same line as Thorpe is using going through the corners. We'll look at the top riders and what they're doing going through this section and can compare some of the back runners as they go through this same section. As we stop David in this corner and look at his body position, let's look over the top of his head there and look at the 3rd place rider and how wide he's running coming out of the turn. Not only is the 3rd place rider, but the 4th place rider as well is using that wide outside line, which makes him also drift wide coming out of the final turn. Then we back up to Jeff Ward running in the number 5 spot, and Ward has gone to where he's swinging wide to get that traction coming out of the turn and to be able to set up for the next straightaway. Looking at some of the back runners, look how many of the riders use and favor that outside line and swing wide coming around the turn rather than holding the inside line, trying to set up for the straightaway and also getting good traction. Although a larger percentage of the riders tend to use the main groove, it is definitely the roughest way around, and it's not always the fastest way around the turn. You can see how tight these top riders right here are holding this inside line coming out of the corner and setting up in order to be able to get the fastest possible line through an S-turn section. Besides having a shorter, faster, straighter line to the next turn, it also enables you to be able to set up slower riders whenever you're coming out of the turn, because they're going to be tending to use the main groove. Should you always follow the berm all the way around the corner? The berm is the fastest way around a turn only if it's built in the right place, only if it's not too rough going through the berm. As you come into a berm that's choppy at the end, drop into the berm and lay the bike over the same as if you were going to ride all the way around the berm. Same body position. Then, once you reach the point of the berm where it starts to get choppy, just before you get there, straighten the bike up, go over the top of the berm, lay back to the inside, make your corner, then drive out of the turn. Just because the berm was good in practice or in the first moto doesn't mean that the berm is going to be good all day long. If that berm creates a problem half, 3/4 of the way around the turn, get out of it. Make your turn and get down the straightaway as fast as you possibly can. Don't abuse yourself and your motorcycle going through those ruts and where there's going to be problems that are going to cause you to get out of control. In the same turn, we'll look at Ricky Johnson trying to set up to make a pass on Jeff Ward. Here, Johnson drops into that berm and pivots, and instead of going and following the berm around the corner, he cuts back to the inside. He just catches the little lip, the little berm on the inside, squares off it, cuts back to the inside. He loses a little bit of speed, but remember, even though he loses speed making this cut, he does have a much shorter distance that he's traveling to get to the same point going down the hill that Jeff Ward is. Another situation on a turn, a lot of berms, people start to use them. In the early part of the day, the berm gets pushed out. When the berm gets pushed to the outside, a lot of times, the berm disappears, it gets too soft, and sometimes it gets too far out of the way. This berm may have started in the position that David's in right now. That may have been where the berm was originally in practice, and it got pushed so far out that it's too far to go. So don't always follow the berm all the way around the corner. Here you can see Brock doing the same exact thing as he comes around the turn. He comes around the turn, and he doesn't go all the way out and follow the berm. He cuts it a little bit short. Whether you ride an open bike or whether you ride a 125, the technique is basically the same. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Off-camber is probably one of the most difficult types of corners to make. Proper body position and how you lean your body. Now we're looking for where is the traction on the off-camber. How do you position your body? Well, the problem is that you have to do two things on the off-camber. One is you have to lean into the hillside as well as away from the hillside. Many riders have a tendency to where, like in a berm turn, for instance, you lean into the corner, and then on a flat turn, you lean away from the turn slightly. Well, in the off-camber, you do both. You weight the outside foot peg, and you get up on the outside of the seat as though you were riding a flat turn. But then the upper part of your body leans into the off-camber as though you were riding around a berm. The other thing that's important is to keep a smooth control of the throttle and your clutch usage. Never make a radical acceleration change on an off-camber. And make sure that you keep your weight forward so that you have complete control over the front end of the motorcycle when you come out. There are many different types of off-camber turns, but always try to get through the turn as quickly as possible and get the bike on a straightaway as soon as you can. Don't drag out the turn on an off-camber. Now, if it's possible, and it's not too far out of your way when you come to the off-camber, if you can find a berm or a flat spot down just past the off camber, go a little bit wide, drop all the way down to the bottom, make your pivot, and cut to where you're coming straight up the uphill so that you're not having to turn so much on and off camber. Sometimes you can be a lot more aggressive that way. Body position is extremely important, and making sure that you have your weight on the outside of that motorcycle and that your upper body is lean into the hillside. Again, leg extension, don't let your foot make contact with the ground. Sliding the rear end around. Here's a technique that you don't see used too often. However, it's a useful technique. It's one you should practice and know how to use. As you come into the corner, what you do is you pull in your clutch, you lock up the rear brake, you lay the bike over slightly so that as you lock up the back brake, the rear end's going to start to slide around. Once the back end slides around and you make that pivot, that direction change, it allows you to get through the corner quicker. However, it's difficult to predict this and to be able to do it 10 times in a row without making a mistake. And that's why so many of the top riders don't use this technique very often. Turns with jumps in them. What makes these so difficult? Probably the most difficult thing is you have to turn the bike while you're in the air. You're no longer on the ground where you can just make a pivot. As you enter that jump, as you approach the jump, you want to make sure that you've got the bike laid over slightly before you go off the jump. It's difficult to go off a jump and then turn the bike once you go in the air. You must make some direction change before you approach the top of the jump, because the way the bike is pointed when it goes off the jump is the direction it's going to travel when it goes through the air. You can't go off the jump and then turn the direction of the bike. You can't change the angle of travel while you're in the air. Remember to maintain that forward hunched over position at all times. The difference is on these types of corners you will be standing and not sitting whenever you go through them. Keep your fingers on the clutch the entire time, and remember that hunched over position, that aggressive, that charged position at all times. Always keep a slight bend in your arms and a slight bend in your knees. Never extend them fully. When you go over the jump, as you're getting ready to turn, remember you should have leaned the bike as you come up the jump, laying the bike over so that you've already started the angle, the direction change of the motorcycle. Then extend your arms and your legs as the suspension extends when you go in the air. Use your hips to slightly kick the back end around a little more than you've already turned the bike. When you land, compress with the suspension and rebound with the suspension. Stay loose and stay relaxed at all times. If you're tight, if you're tense at all, you will not be able to do these maneuvers. You must flow and you must relax when you're riding the motorcycle, particularly to be able to turn and jump at the same time. Remember, as you approach the jump, you must be laying the bike over slightly. Your head should be over the front end of the motorcycle with your arms bent. Then kick the back end around. The bike will naturally kick the back end around a little bit if you come off the jump with it laid over. Don't forget to straighten the bike back up before you land. Passing is probably the most difficult part of racing. The reason most riders have so much trouble passing is because they tend to use the groove all the time. They never get out of it. They don't have alternate lines. You must work on the rider in every single corner. Go from the inside to the outside. Try every possible line. Remember, if you follow the rider through the corner, you're going to be behind him entering the turn, and you're going to be behind him when you exit the turn. If you try a little different line, everywhere on the racetrack, in every corner, if he makes a mistake, you have a chance of going around him. However, every attempt is not always successful. Sometimes you may try for an entire moto and you may never make that pass. Obviously, problems can happen to you when you're trying to make that pass, so you have to accept those as well. sometimes it even becomes necessary to become a little bit aggressive or a little bit overly aggressive in order to be able to get past the rider, particularly if you're running with a rider that is equally the same caliber or the same speed as you're running. Here you see David and Brock in a stadium event where David comes in and tags the rear wheel of Brock. He bumps into him. You have to have a little bit of confidence in the rider in front of you in order to be able to do this. Here Brock slowed down a little bit more than David thought he was, so he ran into the back of him. You must be sure that you keep your hand on the clutch, because in that situation when you come in, you're not sure what the rider in front of you is going to do, and you don't want to end up getting stalled or falling down in that situation. Be aggressive at all times when you're trying to pass. Never let a rider know whether you're going to be trying to pass him on the inside or pass him on the outside. Make him think. Hopefully, what you're going to do is get the rider to be thinking more about what you're doing, and he'll lose his concentration, which will enable you to pass. You must practice passing. When you go out and you practice during the week, if you have anybody that you can ride with, regardless of the caliber of rider that you're riding with, put the slower rider in front, let him go, try and pass him in every corner that you can, on the inside, on the outside, every line you can possibly use. Every time that you pass that rider, pull over, let him go by, and try and pass him again. You're going to improve on his drive, on his aggressiveness to go through the turn, because he's going to realize how slow he's going, and you're going to improve on your passing, which is going to help you when you get out on the racetrack and get a bad start to be able to get by riders. You must be aggressive if you intend to pass. Well, how do other sports build champions? With video, with coaching, and with proper practicing techniques. How you practice is very important. Don't go out and race the racetrack. Recognize your problem and go out and practice it properly. Oh, hi there. Hey, well, thanks for joining me for the last hour on these cornering techniques, watching these guys really know how to do their stuff and do it right. Well, remember, practice is the most important thing. So when you go out and practice, don't just ride around the racetrack. Make sure that you go out and work on those corners and practice them like you should. And, well, if you've got any ideas or suggestions, anything you'd like to see on video, be sure and write me or call me and let me know, and I'll be glad to see if I can help you out. Thanks a lot, good luck, and enjoy yourself when you go out riding.